Wanting to keep my podcast sponsorships and advertisements free, I stayed away from such options. Instead, earlier this year, an alternative appeared. With my fiancée, we have joined a rapidly growing marketing network for a company which develops technologies and healthcare products based on traditional Chinese medicine. Instead of advertising products and services, I've decided to extend this opportunity to you. While this opportunity may not be for everyone and might still be unavailable in your country, I have no doubt that in time it could be, and therefore, here we are. If you are looking for a side hustle, an alternative way of earning, and a space to grow as your own boss and manager, this program could be for you. Commission-based and fully remote, I believe it to be an opportunity for those who feel like a 9-to-5 model takes away too much of their life and isn't exactly worth their time. If you'd like to learn more, follow the link below. If your country is on the list, you're in. I look forward to working with you, and now, enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to WS Podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast entertaining, useful, in any way, shape or form, something for you and others to share, then please make sure to follow, subscribe. It helps the podcast to grow. And if you'd like to share it with a friend, maybe put it on your social media, that would be wonderful. And if you'd like to support the podcast in any other way, as I mentioned early on, feel free to join our team. Otherwise, follow the link below and see what's there. And I'm always very keen to hear any of your comments, maybe suggestions for the books to read, topics to discuss, and maybe some reflections. So thank you so much for all of you who are, and thank you, my dear listener, for being here. Now, as you might hear, my voice is a bit off today, so please pardon me if it will not be as perfect and wonderfully sounding as usual. My brain is also a little bit frazzled. I started the next semester of my qualification, and this time round, I must say, it's a quantum leap in terms of the difficulty. So I'll certainly be slightly slower today, I guess. But I'm not expecting any interruptions. I have my laptop connected. My flatmate Kuba is viewing a flat away, so there's also no one in the flat right now, so should be fine. So thank you so much for coming, and let's kick it off. I have some notes as per usual on my laptop as well as in my little notebook. And guys, today we're gonna discuss a book by Albert Camus called The Plague, which I've read a while back, I think a few months now. I read it after getting it suggested by my younger brother, Tomek. Big shout out to my younger brother, who actually got his results for his A-levels in Poland just, I think, 2 days ago, and he obviously smashed it. I mean, he proper smashed it. So if he ever hears this episode, congrats, my little bro. I'm really proud. And and he suggested this book. We were talking about it. We were talking about it in the context of the pandemic, which obviously by now seems to be far in the past, but it will certainly be a topic to discuss every now and then with people. And what I've observed, just to begin with, is that depending on how you've experienced it, it was something positive or negative. And I'm not saying positive in a sense that you enjoyed the panic and people, being ill across the world, but it was a productive, potentially, or eye-opening, or an awakening of a sort for you. It certainly was for me. So, in line with the ideas that I will share with you today, I will start with this topic, which, I think at this point, I might start with the topic to begin with, which is about the, finding yourself, the personal responsibility or finding opportunities, basically, in the face of a crisis. So just for context, the novel by Albert Camus was published in 1947, and it's basically a story of the bubonic plague in the Algerian city, which it's like I guess it's a historical allegory of a sort. And I will not share too much of the story, but for context, there is this doctor, and there are other characters that are sort of participating in his adventures as he's trying to help his fellow citizens through this tragedy. Now, the first idea I wanted to share with you is this idea of finding opportunities for personal growth, for personal responsibility in this crisis of a sort. So let's start with this. I don't think it's too much, or it's outlandish to say that COVID pandemic changed many people's lives. And I think some of us, maybe some of you, my dear listeners, have found that it changed it for the better or for the worse. Personally, I actually had quite a nice time during the pandemic. And I don't mean nice, yet again, because of all the troubles and tribulations of the world. But it was certainly a moment for me when I had a chance to reconnect with some of my passions and loves. I started writing much more actively and sort of purposefully. I began this podcast like literally out of boredom of being at the house so long on my own, because I lived alone for the first one of the parts of the pandemic, and that was the time when I started recording the podcast. And I found that for me it was a big wake-up call surrounding like healthy habits, healthy eating, working out much more. I remember I reconnected to nature in a greater way. I had more time actually to be with nature. I didn't go to the office like many of us, I think, like most of us really. And I had the chance to basically realize how many things I'm doing in my day-to-day life which are not necessarily good for me. I didn't party as much as I used to, and I had the chance to focus on personal growth. And I really believe that the whole experience allowed me to come out stronger and more well-equipped to be a well-rounded human being, I think, and an adult in a way, even though I was already an adult by then. Now, of course, this might not be the case for you. I know many people found the time of the pandemic very worrisome, very fearful. Some people lost their, friends, their family members. Some people really fell out with their loved ones in many ways. Some people gained weight when they didn't want to. Some people fell into bad habits. I know that alcoholism and usage of porn and other vices that are so easy to engage with but are also so destructive definitely have risen throughout that time. And I was wondering, and I keep wondering, I've been discussing it with some of my friends before, and certainly I discussed it with my brother when we talked about the book, that what makes this change, right? What makes this difference between those that took advantage of the challenge and those that sort of forfeited the opportunity to grow and actually fell down in many ways. And I guess a big part of it is what is explored in the book, The Plague, which is that in a moment of adversity, in the time that tests us, that's where we either allow ourselves to grow through pain and effort, or we fall down or maybe fall back, and therefore actually, lose and miss out on the opportunity to grow and, bring up some more meaning, some more purpose into our life. Now, the quote for this particular theme is that what's true of all evils in the world is true of the plague as well. It helps men to rise above themselves. In other words, it helps us to grow. Opportunity for growth comes through challenge. You rarely grow and expand your abilities by doing the same thing over and over again. And of course, once something becomes automatic for you, it might be more pleasurable in many ways because you don't have to put as much effort into it. But that's also the moment when you stop growing in that niche, in that sphere. And something that I wanted to raise here for you to have a think about, and this applies to all kinds of crises that your life might entail. And, there are many reasons and many ways in which the world can offer us some crises in our life. And I have no doubt that most of us, if not all of us, will face some adversity, hopefully in small increments, so we have time to adapt and overcome over our lifetime. And this idea is, the difference between courage and bravery, and how courage works, how courage is built. I once bought a while back a poster, like a metal poster, for my brother's room when he was young still, much younger than he is right now. He's still quite young. And that said, it was a quote from John Wayne from one of the Western movies, that courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And of course it means, while despite the fear, to go, into that abyss, to gaze into the abyss in many ways. And, there is something to be said about it. I know Jordan Peterson is a big proponent of this, and if you look it up online, or just check out the book 12 Rules for Life, which I'll link below, he talks about the way therapy works for people, that if you're scared of something, if you have a phobia of a sort, it's not actually that therapy makes that phobia go away. It's just that through therapy, through exposing yourself to this thing that you fear over and over and over again, in increasing increments, you become courageous. So you overcome that fear with your courage. So the fear is still there, but it's manageable because you're managing it through courage. You're sort of tipping the scale into the other side. And, the example he brings up in one of his lectures is that if you're scared of the elevator, maybe, and if you're so scared of the elevator that you won't even consider thinking about an elevator, then the first step in the therapy is likely to be, let's just think about the elevator for a minute. Really tiny thing if you think about it, but of course for that person it might be deathly scary. And over time, maybe a few weeks later, we will go and look at the elevator together. Maybe at some point the doctor goes with the patient and actually opens the elevator door. Maybe they get in for a moment, and over time growing this familiarity in a way, and acceptance that it's, that you're okay in all those spaces. You're growing your courage to deal with this adversity. And in the same way, I think, of course, maybe not as pleasantly, incrementally changing over time, but when you are placed in a situation when you have to react quickly to a crisis, that's when you have that, tiny spot of an opportunity to either change yourself for the better by becoming, more courageous and overcoming this challenge, or falling back and retreating and essentially reinforcing the fear. Because if you think about it, courage is in the same way, in that regard, a muscle that you train. It's exactly what they do during those therapy sessions. You're training your muscle to be stronger, so over time it's able to carry more weight, right? And in the same way, in life, and I bet you can resonate with this truly because it's a part of everyone's life, you've been growing in capacity and skills over time, and naturally you know that you're becoming more and more resilient and more powerful when you see the results pop up. And of course, it's like learning how to swim. It might not be the best way just to dive into the deep end without having any idea whatsoever what to do. You might drown. But incrementally, if you were thrown into the deep end with some piece to, some buoy maybe to help you stay up, and then someone tells you what kind of activities you're supposed to do, with that limited knowledge, you can then really overcome this, challenge. And then after some time, you get into the pool, no problem, and you're feeling completely fine with it. So what once was scary becomes normal, right? And this is this idea that the crisis helps men to rise above themselves, because over time we do rise above ourselves and our skills and our abilities, and we overcome these challenges much more lightly. And I think, just as a maybe a little disclaimer, I've written down here that courage is not the same as bravery, because as I understand bravery, it reminds me of like an ignorant courage. So courage without understanding what is there to be feared. And because of bravery, I think we are more liable to making profound mistakes and putting ourselves in unnecessary danger, whereas courage is, I would argue, a more healthy alternative to bravery, which looks at the facts and understands the fears and troubles and challenges that are there, the danger, but at the same time, through that perseverance, self-reliance, and personal growth and strength, you're able to act with courage against that adversity and essentially over time become more, right? And I think COVID crisis was one of those moments when we were faced with adversity. The whole world was faced with adversity of a sort, whatever you want to say about it. And then it was up to each and every one of us how we act in this adversity and what we make of it. And quite frankly, from my perspective, it was a great opportunity. But of course, this is just my personal experience. I can imagine that for some, it was not as positive in quote unquote positive sense. Now, the second main theme that I wanted to explore with you is quite closely related, actually, which is this spiritual struggle against absurdity. So the quote here is, "I have no idea what's awaiting me or what will happen when this all ends. For the moment, I know this. There are sick people and they need curing." Now, what I found in the book, and I think what's relevant to our topics as we go through our adventures on this podcast and in life, is that sometimes what you need to do is you need to focus on the task at hand And instead of thinking too far ahead, which can be too scary, you need to focus on the smaller bits and pieces that allow you to move forward. In extreme cases, such as the story of Marcus Luttrell, if you've seen the amazing movie Lone Survivor by I don't remember the film director, but the main actor, Mark Wahlberg, plays Marcus Luttrell, this Navy SEAL operator during the one of their special operations in Afghanistan. You know, he said he mentions, I think, in one of his speeches, the actual guy who lived through that experience, and I'm pretty sure it's mentioned in the movie as well, that he crawled for however many miles, being completely, you know, destroyed in terms of his body being very, very hurt and weak. And what he would do is he would just draw the line in the sand, you know, as far as he could reach, and then he would crawl past that line and do it again and again. Because if he said something like, if he were to think about it in a whole, you know, journey, it would just be too much. And I've heard it again and again in many different explorations of the idea of persevering and struggling against something that is overwhelming, that it might be a good idea that you measure your progress in biggest interval possible for you. And this is the key part of this sentence: in biggest possible interval for you. So for example, you know, if you're struggling with weight and you'd like to get more exercise, but even walking, you know, for 10 minutes is getting you too intensely maybe over breathing, or you feel like your heart is palpitating, you know, that's an extreme case, but of course you might be, some people are faced with such adversity. Then what you might need to do is to start really small. For example, decide for yourself that you will walk for 2 minutes, right? Instead of making the whole 30 minutes or an hour or a marathon run, you can start by running for 2 minutes, and then for 5, and then for 10, and then for 15, 20, 45, and so forth. In the same way, you can approach any big major task at hand. From my personal experience, something that I'm emulating every day, and I literally talked about this with one of my co-workers today. A friend of mine who's slightly further down the line in this whole shebang of, I guess, career in the company. I told him that I started studying, and it's so much, like there's so much material that it took me 8 hours, to finish one chunk, one lesson, so to speak, one module. And he said exactly this. He said, don't think of it as a full 40 hours worth of studying, or 120 hours worth of studying, or 2 months. Rather, maybe if you need, just make it to the next topic, just make it to the next page, right? Minimize this so you're not overwhelmed with what's yet to come. And basically this idea is like, if you have a big pie to eat, then you can still cut it into small pieces. And in the same way, if you have a project, if you have some studies, some training, some healing to do, maybe you have some debts that you need to pay off. I know that I had, and I'm still paying off some. And that's another space where I certainly feel empowered by this idea that every month, every time I get the chance, I just chip away at this goal, right? Instead of thinking of the whole of it, I chip away and I sort of celebrate those little steps. And in the same way as this crawling to the next line and crawling to the next line, you can focus on the moment at hand. You can become more aware of being just here and now, and there is much less suffering when you're present than when you're thinking about the past or thinking about the future. And I'll actually link for you here an episode, a very early episode of my podcast when I hurt my head. There is one just before that if you want as well to basically get to know what happened. But I had an accident. It was a really stupid one, and essentially I ended up in a hospital, and I was sat there on the floor without my phone. I was not able to read because I had the head taped up. My phone was off, it was out of charge, and I really had to just be there in the present moment. And I'm not saying it was easy, but it allowed me to realize just by being in the moment, even if it is a difficult moment, even if you are suffering, there is much less suffering involved if you're only suffering about the present. If you're not also adding to the suffering by thinking about the future or thinking about the past. The past is no more and the future is uncertain. It's a cliche to say, but for the most part, apparently like 99% of our worries do not actually come to pass, and we worry unnecessarily. But if you're right now in a state of suffering, and on top of that suffering that you're experiencing in that moment, you're gonna layer more and more suffering from the past or the future, you're essentially just adding yourself unnecessary suffering. And I think this is what Rieux, so the doctor of the story, has in mind when he says that for the moment I know this, there are sick people and they need curing. He suggests that he will just focus on this, especially in the moment of true helplessness and struggle. He focuses on here and now, on what's the task at hand, and finds purpose in that task. Now, the third theme is a rather radical one. Rather radical. Say that 20 times really fast. This one is a radical statement, but it certainly rings true to me in many ways. It's this idea of everyone's responsibility, a sort of solidarity in responsibility. So the quote is, "We can't stir a finger in this world without the risk of bringing death to somebody. Yes, I've been ashamed ever since. I have realized that we all have plague, and I have lost my peace." It's one of the other characters when they're discussing, how the plague changed their perspective on the world. Now, you have this idea from Extreme Ownership book by Jocko Willink, which I will have to discuss with you. I've never actually done it. I mentioned it a few times, and I have it written on my list. I did read the book. It's an exquisite book, so I'll link below the link to the book itself for you to explore. This idea, what Jocko in his basically, if you don't know who's Jocko Willink, he has his own podcast, but essentially he was also a soldier, a Navy SEAL, and he wrote this book about extreme ownership that basically states that whatever is happening around you, you have a responsibility for it in a greater or smaller capacity, but you do. And essentially, the way I understood it is Jocko advocates for us to take responsibility for all that is happening around and really become the agent of change in our environment, in our world. And of course, this radical responsibility is also echoed by Solzhenitsyn's exploration in Gulag Archipelago, which we've discussed in one of the episodes. So I'll link the episode below. He, as he's being put in prison basically for nothing, which is essentially for that majority of people in the Soviet Union were put in prison and killed for. And as he does so, as he's there, he starts to review what got him to that place and has this epiphany that it's all because of him, because of his choices that led him there. And he has this radical idea that I am responsible for everything that happens to me and everything that happens in this world. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean that essentially at all times your actions are, that's not as I understand it at least, that at all times your actions are affecting everyone else everywhere all at once. But I do think that there is something to be said about this ripple effect and this butterfly effect, if you will, that throughout your life, throughout our experiences, throughout our days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, what we do, there is this beautiful quote from Gladiator, right? What we do in life echoes in eternity. And I don't think it only means that it echoes in eternity after we die because we were here. Rather, I think it echoes in eternity because through each act that we're doing, we're sending a ripple effect into the world. Think about it. Every interaction you have in your day with anyone, with a cashier at store, with your loved one, with a colleague, with someone that crosses the street in front of you, all of these interactions are building this fabric, this myriad of connections, this network. And if you think about the world as an ocean and us being little drops in this ocean, we certainly ripple through our actions, through our being, across the many people. There are these ideas that over the course of your life you'll meet like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and essentially, radically, in many ways, you will touch them all to some degree, some more than others. Of course, if it's your loved one, then you will imprint yourself on their life much more than if it's a stranger in the shop. But if you look at it from the perspective that we're all interconnected and that everything affects everything else, that's where this exploration of we can't stir a finger in this world without the risk of bringing death to somebody comes into play. It's about realizing just how powerful our actions actually are. And I think, especially nowadays, we are so... it seems like many generations, many young people in particular, are feeling so lost and so hopeless. And I hope that's not the case for you. But if it is, I just want to remind you that you have real impact on people's lives on the daily basis. And you're much more impactful, much more powerful than you think you are. And quite frankly, personally, I think that the best way to make the world a better place is by making yourself a better human and being a better human to others. And, of course, there are some ways that you can improve the world by acting out certain things, making certain choices and actions. But I think it's a good humbling start and a really important one to first work on yourself. It's this idea from Peterson again that make your bed, right? Clean up your room before you criticize the world. Really work on yourself first, and then as you help yourself, you will help others over time. And I see it in my life all the time. I have no doubt that by working on myself and by being really critical of myself, I have become a better a partner for my girlfriend, now fiancé, a better brother for my siblings, a better son for my parents, a better employee, a better friend. And I would encourage you to try and embrace this ability, or this self-responsibility. And I would say even more, I think it's quite empowering to think that way. Because why? Because if you think that everything is up to you and you have the power to change what is going on, you might not be able to change what happens to you, but you certainly have the power to choose what you do about it. Now, that's when you can really make some changes. Because if you're having a bad relationship with someone and you blame all of what's going on them, then essentially what you're saying is there is nothing that can be done about it from your perspective, because you have no agency, right? It's all their fault. They are doing this and that, and it's all because of them. If that's the case, then what you're giving away is a responsibility and agency of changing that, right? There is no hope in that regard. But now, if you turn it around and you think for yourself, well, they might be doing this and that, but what am I doing that makes this situation? Maybe there are some things that I could change in my behavior to make that situation not happen again, or with another person, or to turn this ship around in this relationship that is flawed. And in that situation, you become optimistic, right? You're actually giving yourself hope because you are the agent of change and you have the power, the agency to make that change. And I find it really empowering to think that way. Whenever I'm, it's not easy and it doesn't always sound as rosy as I'm sharing it with you right now, but it's this idea from the letting go, right, by David Hawkins, that or this prayer of serenity prayer, God made me wise to accept the things I can, wise to, how was it? God make me, help me accept the things I cannot change and give me strength to change the ones I can, and wisdom to know the difference. It's this idea, right? And I think it's very empowering. Let go of what is going on and figure out how can you make it better? How can you make yourself better? And by becoming a better person, you will, breed better outcomes. I have no doubt about it. I'm a living proof in many ways, and I'm way down the line still, crawling up those many hills. I'm just saying, if it's possible for me, it's certainly possible for you. Now, the fourth theme I wanted to explore with you is this idea that to build on this foundation of walking maybe 1 meter at a time, or 2 minutes instead of 10, or running a kilometer instead of a marathon. It's also to refuse to despair and not give up, especially in the moment when it's difficult, right? So the quote here is, all I maintain is that on this earth there are pestilences and there are victims, and it's up to you, up to us, so far as possible, not to join forces with the pestilences. Now, the pestilences here, I guess it's a weird word, right? But basically, in this context, what it means is you don't want to become the person that is cynical, bitter, and gives up. and essentially starts to sort of even be cynical about the efforts. You need to refuse to give in to despair. You need to build this strength through stubborn, principled effort. And this effort is essentially what we've explored so many times in our episodes. It's this foundation of your life, which is persistence and consistency, your habits, your decisions, sticking to those decisions, And I remember in particular when we explored this wonderful book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the ideas there strikes that exact note, which is, once you come up with a plan, once you start pursuing it, be resilient, be persistent, don't give up. As they say, if you're going through hell, keep going. I think it's almost like a moral stance. If there is something that you believe in truly, you think it's worth your while, and you would in normal circumstances make an effort towards it, then just because the circumstances have changed and now it's more challenging, you should not change your attitude about it. It's almost like a commitment to act ethically, and I don't mean ethically in general, but ethically with your own ethics, with your own morals, to within yourself be in integrity with what you do, right? And it goes without saying, I think it's also one of the best ways of securing your relationships and your future, because people over time, we are all watching one another. Of course, I'm not watching you, maybe in particular, but you certainly are watching me if you're listening to this podcast over time. And I certainly am watching all of my friends, colleagues, workmates and family members and so forth. And I'm also watching other YouTubers, podcasters, politicians, all kinds of people. We're constantly watching one another. And even if subconsciously, we are constantly decoding what people do. And it's very easy to lose people's trust, right? And we have this, apparently, and I would agree, I think women have even a stronger intuition in terms of figuring out who's a fraud or, who has bad intentions. I think us men are slightly more on the dumber side on that front. But we are constantly watching one another, and we can tell when someone's not, honest, especially over time. Maybe one time you can cheat someone, you can lie if they don't know you in particular. But over time, if they get to know you, then it becomes harder and harder to cheat them, to trick them. And I think in many ways, if you stand for something and an opportunity or a challenge, depending how you look at it, appears to test whether what you stand for truly is what you stand for, that's one of those moments when you get to know, for example, if your friend is truly a friend, or if you are who you say you are. And I would just want to give you the word of caution about it, or an invitation really, to realize that, because it's always there. If you say you're a reliable friend, but you do consistently miss those times when you say you're going to do something and you don't. Personally, I really dislike that attitude. I like to think I'm a man of my word in many ways. And of course, sometimes I fail to deliver. But I would encourage you to be the man or the woman of your word, or just don't say that you're going to do something if you're not going to do it. This is another side of the coin. You don't have to say yes to everything and promise everything to everyone. And quite frankly, I think it's to your demise, because then you are more likely not to deliver it all, right? So you can also be much more assertive and much more frugal with your choices of what you promise to other people to deliver. But what I'm saying is we are observing one another at all times, and it's in those moments of challenge and adversity that what you stand for truly shows its true colors, in many ways. Now, our final topic, final theme, is about the something that I wanted to leave with you as well as an invitation for this week. And it's unusual, I think, in many ways, because we usually in these episodes, the way I see it is I usually give you some ideas that resonated with me and maybe a little guidance as well on some ways of approaching topics, or maybe I'm just giving you some questions to ask yourself. But I rarely talk about compassion. And we did talk about compassion a few times, but I think this one in particular is curious. So the quote is, "What interests me is being a man." And it's Rieux's response to Thoreau's question about being a saint. He says that he's interested in being a man. Now, a quote that sprang up to my mind straight away as I read this part of the book is the quote from the Bible, which says, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing," right? And we did speak about it before. We did talk about it before on this podcast. Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing. I'll actually link below the episode which treats on this. I think it's called Forgive and Let Go, something like that. And let me be clear, okay? Because this is also I don't know if you've heard the episode about Parasitic Mind book by Gat Sad. I'll also link it below. It certainly is worth your while if you that book is essential, I think, for our times, because we are in many ways, we have fallen in the West especially into the trap of being empathetic too much. Gat Sad calls it suicidal empathy. I think he actually has another book of that exact title. And now, I don't want you to think of compassion as empathy. While both of them seem similar, and in many ways they are, one is more focused on experiencing the challenges of the other person with the other person, being a supportive sort of bystander, and the other one is sort of taking the burden onto yourself, especially emotionally. I think this is the empathy that is actually killing us in the West in many ways. We mixed up the approach, right? Instead of forgiving others for what they're doing and helping them out, we are absolving them by taking up their crosses and basically drowning underneath their suffering, while there's sitting on the side watching us suffer for them, essentially, I think. And now, first, something that I've written down here is The Plague, the book, is a meditation on what it means to live meaningfully in a world that doesn't make any sense. Let me explore this from this angle. I think being compassionate to others is transformative for us, because it allows us to improve our relationship with the world without putting a strain on ourselves. And quite frankly, it's also healing us. So one thing that is important to note, and that's why, both in the Bible and in other great scriptures, there is such an emphasis on forgiveness, is this idea that actually if you don't forgive someone, if you are hating on someone, what you're doing is you're actually hurting yourself. Hate as energy is really destructive to your own self, to your own spirit, to your own body, to your own energy. If you want to explore the book The Letting Go by David Hawkins, the link is below. He talks there about this map of consciousness, which we've explored in so many episodes. I will not elaborate on this again, but essentially different emotions have different energies, and these different energies impact our life in different way. If you have loving energy and accepting energy, you will be a very different you will live a very different life than if you have a hateful, or spiteful or fearful or angry energy, right? And the idea of compassion as, exploring this, being compassionate to others, seeing their suffering and helping them go through that suffering without putting too much strain on yourself, I think is a very lofty and a good ideal. The problem happens when you become a sponge to other people's problems, and essentially you become infected with their troubles, especially if they don't actually want to heal those troubles because maybe they have some sentiment towards them. Now, one story for me to share with you is I had this flatmate at uni who had a myriad of self-destructive tendencies. I hope he's okay. I hope he's doing fine. I certainly doubt that he's better than he was before. But from the very beginning of our relationship in the group, he was the kind of person that would take all that you give and wouldn't give anything from himself. He failed to deliver over and over again, and he made choices that essentially did not only put his life or his choice, his career, whatever, his uni career in jeopardy, but it essentially also hurt everyone around. He never paid his rent, so majority of my friends never got their deposit back because the agency had to take that deposit. Quite frankly, I think he only paid me back because he thought Polish people are poor, or because he was scared of me. I don't know. Either or is simple enough explanation, I think, for him. And I know for a fact that this kind of a person thrives in the society that is empathetic to the bone. Because over and over and over again, I think he did it 3 or 4 times in a row, he would find a group of people that would be empathetic to him, that would be, feeling for him and being really friendly with him because he could be friendly when he needed to. And like a parasite, over and over and over again, he would leave them after the year of living with them impoverished in many ways, and basically he would burn the bridges, of course, because and we literally did it. A year after, when we stopped living together, we told a group of friends that were friends with that guy what he did to us. And the girls in that group who wanted to live with him next year said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll change him. It's fine. He will be okay with us." And then, of course, you can imagine that a year later they told us that we were right, and he did the same. He tricked them in the same way. My point here is that while I encourage you to forgive those kind of people and to let go, to not be hateful or angry or to hold grudge, I also want to be wary of those people, because there are such people, and we can call them emotional vampires, energy vampires, people basically that and you know who those people are when you feel it. Is like, if you're going to meet with such a person and after the meeting you feel drained, then well done. You just got yourself a vampire to suck out your energy, essentially. If you have a friend who's constantly upset about things and who's constantly, whenever you meet, taking up all your energy, sharing their troubles and, basically proving how the world is not in their favor, then I would encourage you to run away or at least isolate yourself from them, because you become the mixture of 5 people you spend the most of your time with. This is a huge, huge thing, and so many different, successful people and thinkers would share that. You become, if you look at who you spend the most time with 5 people, you can expect what kind of results you're gonna have. And if one of those people is someone who is pulling you down, then what you're essentially doing to yourself in that sphere of life is you're pulling yourself down. And just because you're compassionate and empathetic, you should not forfeit your future, your success, your well-being, most importantly. So I encourage you to have compassion and to be empathetic to people, but I want to caution you against this suicidal empathy of a sort, against allowing others to take advantage of you because you're kind. It's this quote, do not confuse my kindness for weakness, right? I encourage you to be kind but stern, kind but assertive, compassionate but assertive. And the invitation for this week, in line with these ideas, is to ask yourself whether there is someone in your life that maybe you're still holding a grudge against, or maybe you're not too nice to them when you see them. Maybe you see them on a daily basis because they're part of your friends group, or they're part of your work or uni or whatever. And figure out whether you could be a bit more compassionate, whether you could pray or think, wish for yourself and for that person to forgive them for they don't know what they do, right? Forgive them for the way they are, forgive them for their troubles, but then also ask yourself whether, if they are on the daily basis or consistently proving to be a detriment to your well-being or the well-being of whatever space of your life, then maybe it's time to let them go, or maybe it's time to withdraw for a little bit to see whether over time that change will happen. I remember I had this experience once with a really close friend of mine, and I'm pretty sure he would know, as I'm saying this, who I mean, that I mean him. We had a really difficult time because he was going through a really difficult time. And there came a point when I did feel that every time we're meeting, I'm basically just a space for him to vent and to spill his suffering onto me. And at the time I wasn't resilient enough, and I wasn't skillful enough in my, in a way of addressing these troubles to recognize what I can do not to allow him to be spilling these troubles onto me so easily. And what I did essentially after some time is there came a point when for some time I avoided his company, and it was long enough for him to recognize that I'm sort of withdrawing a little bit. And then we had a chat, and then I explained why I did what I did for my own well-being's benefit. And we've gone back to be really good friends on new terms. And I think it was also a wake-up call for him in many ways on, to recognize when he is venting too much and when he is overwhelming the discussion with his own problems, essentially inflating them, right? Because if you share a problem with another, then it's just two of you with a problem. It's not actually solving the problem unless you're working on the problem to solve. So yeah, on one hand, think whether you could be more compassionate, more empathetic, more understanding, more forgiving to that person you have in mind. And I bet by now you have a person in mind to apply this to. But at the same time, recognize and be more aware, more vigilant in your life, to recognize whenever someone is trying to take advantage of you or is sucking you out of energy. Maybe not knowingly, really. People often do it without realizing, just out of habit. And think, what could you do about it? Be aware of it, right? So, yeah, quite a heavy book, I must say. It's a beautifully written book. It's not an easy read, though, as majority of books which I'm sharing with you, for which I apologize. But quite frankly, if you are listening to this podcast, I applaud you, because I commend you, because I think these are many of these topics, and I have even more rough ones in the future to explore. Many of these topics are exactly what we should look at, and are exactly what we don't look at in the daily in our daily lives, because they're just too difficult. So thank you for being one of the few that minds, that thinks about these things, that gazes into the abyss with courage and faith. So yeah, yet again, please make sure to follow and subscribe, if you find this podcast useful. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. I hope my voice was okay. Maybe a little bit ASMR for you. So yeah, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.